So, good morning, everyone. Alessia Cassia. So, as Anthea said, I'm a project assistant for the International Organization for Migration. Today, I thank the organizers for inviting me and all the participants. Today, I will focus on human trafficking. As you can see from my slides, I will talk about the reference standards with some references to the national regulations and the systems of protection for the victims of human trafficking in Italy. And I will focus on the human on the trafficking of human beings and what has been developed on the basis of arrivals from the sea, especially of Nigerian women. And I will talk about the role of the International Organization for Migration with references to early identification of victims of trafficking from the sea, and also of our context. So I will talk about mixed flows. In the last few years, there were several changes concerning flows from the sea in terms of figures. There were sometimes a high number of migrants disembarking on the Italian coasts, but from 2019, the figures have decreased as compared to the past. Today, arrivals are still there, but they cannot be compared to the figures of 2007, for example, when there was a high concentration of migrants disembarking on our coasts. The changes concern other elements, among which the nationalities. We pass from periods in which Eritrea and Nigeria were the predominant nationalities for people coming from the sea, two periods in which main nationalities were Cote d'Ivoire and Tunisia. And this is strictly linked to the opening or closing of the routes from Libya. From Libya, there are less people who leave. This is due to the tragic socio-political situation linked to the reference country. And this is the route from which women victims of trafficking leave. Nigerian women destined to sexual exploitation in Europe. Concerning the route for Tunisia, recording a high number in people leaving from there, it is the route that is mainly used for traffickers, for transportation, because victims of trafficking of Cote d'Ivoire nationality can reach Europe to be exploited in sexual contexts and destined to forced marriages. But regardless of the reasons why these people leave the country of origin, people who arrive in Italy are people with vulnerable typologies. There are unaccompanied children, women, most of them are pregnant due to the violences, especially in the transit countries, people with mental disorders or disabilities, single parent groups, elders, victims of torture, violence, genital mutilation, and of trafficking. Concerning the last vulnerability, and I would like to focus on this, This is Article 601 of the Criminal Code, Chapter 1, in order to understand the elements of the crime. So, those who recruit, introduce, transport, or gives the power on the person, or receives one or more people, can be punished with prison from 8 to 20 years. And this concerns those who are in the conditions under Article 600. And so this concerns the various methods by means of the threat, use of force, other forms of coercion, of abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, vulnerability. And in this slide, I have summarized these elements. So the standard refers recruitment, introduction in the territory, transfer from the country of origin, transport, the cession of power and hospitality, and coercive methods. We find the fraud, the violence, deception and threat, abuse of authority, and exploitation of a vulnerability situation, promise or offer of money. There are many situations of exploitation: work, sexual, begging, illicit activities. Many victims of trafficking are obliged to carry out illicit activities and the removal of organs. Concerning the victims of trafficking who decided to emerge from their situation of exploitation, the protection instrument is Article 18 of the Legislative Decree 286 of 1998. It is an innovative instrument because there is a double path. The victim who decides to emerge from an exploitation situation can decide to follow a judicial proceeding, and so to lodge a complaint against the traffickers, and can use this type of instrument and obtain a residence permit, even if the complaint is not formalized. But in these cases, the victim must adhere to the assistance program of social integration, must accept the commitments and the program related to the reference facility in which he or she will be included. I introduced this slide because in many contexts there is a confusion between the trafficking and the smuggling. As you can see, I included the common elements of both the crimes and the differences. In trafficking crime, there is no consent from the victim. If we refer to adults, the behavior is through coercion methods. The consent is not relevant. In the case of foreign unaccompanied minors, the consent is always irrelevant. The consent of the victim, the crime of trafficking is internal, it's not necessary to have an irregular entry in another country, but the smuggling crime envisages irregular crossing of borders. The relationship between victim and exploiter in the trafficking crime implies the exploitation of the victim. In the case of smuggling, the relationship implies irregular crossing of borders only. In the case of trafficking, the profit comes from the victim exploitation. In the case of smuggling, the profit comes from the payment of the service offered to the reference person. Trafficking is a crime against individuals. Smuggling is a crime against the state. As to the elements that are common to both the crimes, they involve criminal groups well organized and rooted in the reference countries, country of origin, country of transit, and in some cases, country of destination. And there are businesses that involve human beings. Some figures on the victims of trafficking from the sea from 2014 to today. In 2016, there was a boom of arrival of women from Nigeria. More than 11,000 women arrived. The figures are very important concerning 2015 and 2017 too. So where are all these people now? All these potential trafficking victims arrived in the last few years. These people are still in Europe. In many cases, they are still exploited. And in the last period, we see some arrivals from other countries of the European Union where victims were exploited for many years. So we start with them a rehabilitation path. They are entered, they are admitted into a rehabilitation facility. Just to give you a few concrete examples, we have identified many victim trafficking for begging. They entered the Italian territory as children, but they are 20 years old now, and we are referring to to men in this case. So they come from other European countries, and so it is very important to keep identifying in an early manner the victims, because they are among us and they must receive a support allowing them to have the right tools to emerge from the exploitation situation in which they live. And let's see the trafficking indicators at the borders of Nigerian women over the years concerning the arrivals of women. Shown in the previous slide, most women are Nigerian, and they were between 14 and 23 years old. So when they arrived, when we met them after disembarking, many women during the identification phase by the authorities tended to say that um, they were of a majority age. So this is an important aspect because many traffickers tell victims that they have to say they have a majority age, because it is simpler for traffickers to have a woman escape from a facility structure rather than a minor woman in a more protected facility. So they are forced to declare their age. Concerning the aspects concerning the attitude of victims when they arrived, very often they move in groups, they are silent, they ask a confirmation, they ask a person of the group for confirmation, just even to move and to talk, so we can immediately see a submissive attitude. And so it is important to be focused on the group. We have to organize individual interviews with people. Very often, these women say that they are sisters, three or four, and so they have to be transferred together. But in this case, it is very important to organize individual interviews because very rarely there are sisters who arrive together. So it is very important to have individual interviews and to match the information. In most cases, we see that it is very difficult to match this information because the information is different, but it is clear that they are not relatives. And this is very important. Why? In those cases, it is important to divide them because even if these are two little girls who are friends, if they are destined to the same trafficker in Italy or in Europe, we we remove the possibility of emerging from the situation because she might be influenced by the other victim. And but in other cases, some women say that they are uncles or mothers of these girls. And so in this case, too, it is important to organize individual interviews because these are at-risk cases. They might, they might be potential victims of traffickers traveling on the same boat. They would like to be transferred in the same reception facility, but the trafficker might control the victim. And so the boy or the girl would have no possibility of emerging from the situation. Concerning the profiles, most girls or boys were eldest daughters of families with problems of poverty, low level of education, but there are also some girls who studied in their country of origin, but they did not have the possibility of continuing their education. They accepted these educations and they accepted to live and to live the family in order to ensure a better future for themselves and for their family of origin. These girls are dreamers, like all girls of this age. They hope that the trafficker is not the person who will lead them to a condition of total submissive condition. So they hope that they are the good person. And very often these girls say that they didn't pay anything for the traveling. They don't know the various parts of the uh, travel, so it is evident that there is something wrong. Concerning the recruitment area, the most significant recruitment area, we know that this area was Edo State from Nigeria. So in order to arrive in Niger and then in Sicily. Not all girls coming from that state or from other states of Nigeria, these girls were brought to Benin City for the voodoo ritual. We will talk later about this. Concerning the trafficking indicators, I don't know whether there are some receipt uh, workers. I see that I have not a lot of time available. Anyway, so these girls who arrive at the received facility with some rules, entry and exit rules, they are they are suspicious, that they are aggressive vis-a-vis the people around them. They excessively use the phone, and they are controlled by the criminal networks. And so they need to start sending money to the reference people. And so they are obliged to prostitute themselves outside the receipt facilities. So when they arrive at the receipt facility, it is important to identify their behaviors, check uh, the calls made to the family of origin, because this is the first moment when girls leave the receipt facilities, and then they follow the criminal networks. So there are some limits to the identification, control by traffickers, a fear of voodoo violation. There is a distrust vis-a-vis authorities because they well remember the reference system of the country of origin. Quite often they don't trust this system. In many cases, the many cases they they have a false information from traffickers. They are told that if they want to emerge, if they want to talk about their situation, they would be brought back to Nigeria by the local authorities. And quite often they are not aware of the condition of victim in which they are. And so they have a sort of a gratitude towards the person, because they reached Europe. And concerning the interview, that is fundamental in order that the victim can have the right tools to emerge from this exploitation situation. When the victim decides to talk about her situation, once the positive elements of the crime have been identified, it is important to report the victim to the National Anti-Trafficking Network. And this uh, re- report will be uh, sent to the competent authority of the network. If the victim decides to mm, enter a rehabilitation path, the victim will be admitted to a secret facility. If the result is negative, anyway, the victim must have the right tools to have the possibility to emerge from this situation later on. So it is important that all the victims this uh, know this free number, so they can contact the worker and the reference victim. I can't I only have 3 minutes, so I think that it is important to keep talking with other slides and to tell you about what the organization is doing.
So the last couple of projects I would like to talk about, I will mention them briefly. This is the one, as you can see on this map, Caporalato, Supreme, Diagrammi Nord and Diagrammi Sud. They covered the whole of Italy. So these projects, they try and fight work exploitation conditions. They try and identify vulnerable conditions concerning work exploitation by caporalato. We have also identified trafficking victims who are still victims after many, many years of work. They still have to pay back their debt for getting the money to migrate. So we are trying to fight all these activities, all these contexts. In all these areas, there is a high concentration of migrant workers, and mediators also also support national inspectors, labor inspectors. They collaborate in the various areas, trying to promote communication between migrant workers and the institutions. In other words, they need to bridge the gap between workers and institutions. I'm now going to finish with these open questions that should promote some discussion, some food for thought. Which are the reasons, in your opinion, for which we need to have an immediate approach to victims? So it's very important to have a very early identification of victims as early as possible, and also that we should get a better knowledge of this trafficking process. So to improve our knowledge of the trafficking process. Thank you. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Alessia.